My name's Noel Clark. I'm a consultant urological surgeon at the Christie and Salford Royal Hospitals in Manchester. I'd like to introduce a symposium which is going to be held at this 2021 BAUS meeting, and it will be held on the 23rd of June between 2 and 2:45. The symposium is on paradigm shift in non-metastatic castrate-resistant prostate cancer, recent developments and treatments in the evolving role of the urologists. This symposium will involve myself, Professor Heather Payne from UCL in London, and Mr. Lawrence Drudge-Coates, nurse consultant, uro-oncologist at King's College. What we're going to do is talk about some of the new data surrounding the management of non-metastatic castrate-resistant prostate cancer, a field which is moving quickly and which urologists need to become involved with. So please come and join us. There's data which I think you'll find valuable. There's an interactive discussion which you can contribute to and which we hope you will enjoy. Thanks very much.
Good morning. My name is Bjui. I'm chair of the BURST Research Collaborative, and it's my pleasure to be able to introduce the BURST 2021 session at BAUS. So we have a fantastic lineup this year, and now I'm going to give you an overview of our activities and opportunities for people to be involved in. And I just want to tickle your taste buds for some of the things that are going to come up in the following sessions. So we have two keynote speakers. The first is Asma Khan, who is the head chef at the Darjeeling Express. She's going to give a fantastically powerful and inspiring talk on how to bring a team of diverse individuals and personalities together to achieve a common goal. Her story is truly inspiring, and in the era of the Kennedy report and what we're trying to achieve with equality, diversity and inclusion, I think this is a must watch for everyone involved in urology. We have Anil Bangu giving a similarly powerful talk, though in a different aspect. This is from how to use science in a pandemic to be able to inform how we manage our patients, and his work from Covid surge has been truly inspiring and is an example for all of us. We have an update from RESECT, which is our TURBT study. We have an update from Alex on the LEARN project, which is looking at the exposure to urology in undergraduates. Kieran Clement will be looking at FIX-IT, which is the consensus meeting on decision-making in scrotal exploration. Chiwanyu Gao will tell people about the COVID surge study, which is in progress. Cameron Alexander will be telling people about the role of BURST in education, and then we'll round off. So we know that when you try to do research on your own without any help, this can be hard. You don't have to do this because we have things like BURST. BURST and its current iteration was founded in 2015. We're a British-based but international network of urologists, residents, methodologists, and allied health professionals. The principle that we have, the key facet of what we do, is that a small amount of work by each collaborative member contributes to large, well-powered studies and can go towards something that's meaningful that can improve patient care. We know that there's a number of benefits for all the parties involved in collaborative research. For the individual, they can gain significant transferable skills and have opportunities to write and publish. For the unit involved in studies from collaborative research, these studies tend to be more important and they have the prestige of being involved in them. The quality of the work tends to be better because of the peer review process which we employ. And most of all, and most importantly, the benefits to the patients from better studies that deliver. Of note, for UK trainees, collaborative authorship is recognised towards CCT guidelines at the moment. And we're honoured to have a patient in public group as part of BURST who help make sure what we're doing is patient focused And I'd like to thank Rachel Bjui and Jacqueline Emks for their work. In addition, we have 23 very hard-working committee members for whom I would also like to extend my thanks and gratitude for all the hard work behind the scenes to make what we do possible. Particularly, I wanted to thank Nikita and Sinan, who are our vice chairs, and they have worked tirelessly behind the scenes the whole year, making sure that what we do is at the highest standard. So thank you, guys. In terms of achievements, we have been presenting around the world and been recognized for it. Since we've been founded, we've presented over 40 times at national or international conferences. We have a number of prizes from those and some key publications. And perhaps one of the things that I'm proudest of is that we have more than 1,000 collaborators actively involved in our projects. So here are a few publication highlights from the last year. First of all, the fact that we have launched our Stent Study, which was announced in the Bgui, is particularly a proud moment of many years of planning. This study, I believe, will be a practice-changing piece of work, which I'll talk about in a bit more detail later. I'm delighted that we've also published the Identify study. The first paper was published in the Bgui, and we will spend some time on that a bit later as well. We've completed the Learn study, which I mentioned was the largest undergraduate study of exposure to urology ever performed. And I'm very pleased that from the systematic review, we have gone on to complete the Fix-It consensus meeting, which is on decision-making in scrotal exploration, a common emergency that every urologist faces. So now I'm going to touch on a handful of projects and mention one or two things that might be interesting and opportunities for people to be involved, or information about some of the results. First of all, our collaboration with the Bjui. In the Bjui journal, we have a dedicated section for trainees to promote and give opportunities for trainees to get things published. Please have a look at the Bjui website for further details. In addition, we have a collaboration with the Bjui Knowledge and have produced a number of modules on research methods, which are available for free for any urologist to be able to view. The next study I wanted to talk about was Identify, and I think this is worth dwelling on in a bit more detail. Identify, which was led by Sinan Kaduri, looked at the investigation and detection of urological cancers in patients referred to secondary care with suspected urinary tract cancer. The objective of the study was to evaluate the contemporary prevalence of urinary tract cancer in patients referred to urologists across a global population. But the key thing was that we were adjusting for established patient risk factors and geographical variation. Some of the previous studies have been limited in the fact that they didn't do this, and they were single center in nature, or they were from quite a select group of patients who were being investigated for other reasons. Now, if we are able to understand the true prevalence of disease in these patients, this can help us inform strategies for who needs to be investigated, who we can prioritize, and who we might be able to deprioritize. This allows appropriate rationing of healthcare resource, which is particularly important in the COVID-19 era. So the patients who are allowed to be included in this study were anyone over the age of 16 who is referred to secondary care with suspected urinary tract cancer. They may or may not have had hematuria, and this was during a one-year period in which the study was ran. And we allowed centers to only include consecutive patients, which reduced the likelihood of selection bias. We excluded patients with a known or previous urological malignancy. The methods of this study was a multi-center prospective observational study. This is the flowchart from the study. The key things to be aware of are that we included just under 11,000 patients from 110 hospitals in 26 countries, which amounts to thousands of hours of work and blood, sweat, and tears from our collaborators across the world, which we are very grateful. Only a minority of patients were excluded because of insufficient data. We also know that from the cohort, the majority of patients had visible hematuria. If we then look at the breakdown of some of the key results, This is a very busy slide, and I don't intend you to look at the detail. But what I wanted to demonstrate was that we have the prevalence rates for cancer detected by visible and non-visible hematuria for bladder, upper tract, and renal cancer, and subdivided by the key risk groups. For example, the age of the patient, the gender of the patient, and smoking history. This is the kind of information that's needed to be able to form evidence-based guidelines for investigation of these subgroups of patients. Here are the key headline figures from the study. The overall adjusted cancer prevalence was just over 28%, with just under 25% of these being bladder cancer, and just over 1% being upper tract and renal, and 1.75% for prostate cancer. Looking at which factors were most strongly associated with detection of cancer, the odds ratios for the association were strongest for visible hematuria rather than non-visible, and smoking rather than non-smoking. In addition, having male sex or being older were also associated with cancer detection. Well, what are the implications of the results, you might ask? Well, this is particularly important because it can inform international guidelines on the investigation of hematuria, and I think this will form the new reference standard for this. We are now creating a risk calculator, allowing clinicians and patients to see the individualized risk of cancer based on their presenting features. That will be available soon in a subsequent paper that we're writing. We're also going to be able to demonstrate alternative pathways for investigating patients to maximize cancer detection, but minimize patient burden. We'll compare the diagnostic test performance characteristics of CT and ultrasound for the detection of urinary tract cancer. And we can also explore the non-hematuria group. Many thanks to our collaborators from around the world who have made this possible, who are all PubMed indexed collaborative authors in the study, and their names are listed here. So the next study I wanted to mention was the RESECT study. Now, RESECT is an international prospective audit of patients undergoing TURBT surgery. The key objective is to determine if audit and feedback can improve the quality of TURBT surgery and reduce early recurrence rates. And whilst it's a prospective observational audit, the feedback is being randomized. Now, I believe that this study has the ability to improve the actual care that we give our patients. And we're going to be investigating achievement of quality indicators, presenting results to surgeons and seeing whether their practice can change. This is a study that is actively open in recruitment, and we have 333 collaborators from the UK registered, a total of just under 1,000 collaborators from under 50 countries around the world registered. This will be the largest study of TURBT ever performed, so please do join now if you haven't already. I did want to touch on the Stent study. In the last year, we published our survey, which looked at patients with ureteroscopy, if it's an uncomplicated ureteroscopy, whether or not they have a stent left or not. We know that leaving a stent can cause bother for the patients, but there is also the risk of not leaving a stent, which might lead to unnecessary hospital admissions or complications. And our stent survey showed that there is genuine equipoise to be able to address this question. And so we're developing a randomized controlled trial with our primary outcomes looking at patient-reported measures, as well as 30-day unplanned admissions to hospital. Another study that we're particularly proud of, which we'll talk about in more detail later, is the FIX-IT study, which was based on a systematic review which identified that there's no strong evidence for one practice or another in testicular torsion explorations. So we've actually carried out a consensus meeting to identify what best practice should be for decision making, and hope that this will form a useful national guideline. Another study I wanted to mention was the DTORT study, which is being led by Hannah Warren and Eleanor Zimmerman. This is a multi-center prospective study evaluating the diagnostic accuracy of Doppler ultrasound in patients undergoing scrotal exploration. Now, the question we want to ask is, can we reduce negative exploration rates and missed torsion by introducing scrotal point of care ultrasound by the assessing surgeon as an adjunct to clinical assessment in acute scrotal pain? We know that from recent work, only about 20% of patients who undergo an exploration actually have torsion, but we also know on the converse side that litigation is primarily from where a torsion is missed. So we're actually going to train surgeons to use this ultrasound to perform an ultrasound before possible exploration. And we're going to see whether the adjunct, the addition of the ultrasound to clinical assessment will improve our ability to find a patient who has torsion. That study is in development, and we hope to give you progress with that in future meetings. The next study I wanted to mention was the Kovid Surge Urology Cancers study, which is being led by Chuan-Yu Gao, with assistance from Cameron Alexander, Alexander Light, and Arjun Nathan. This is based on the Kovid Surge large study, which Anil Bangu will be talking to you about later. And specifically, it's talking about patients who had bladder cancer, prostate cancer, or renal cancer diagnosed during the first wave of the pandemic. We're looking at patients who were operated, or perhaps whose management was changed or delayed during that first 3-month period. And we want to see in this potentially unique natural history experiment whether or not delaying the management of some of these patients or changing their care will affect their long-term outcomes. And we're particularly focused on 1-year outcomes for prostate cancer and 3-year outcomes for bladder and renal cancer. And so if any of your centers took part in this study in the first wave, we do have several thousands worth of patients who we can collect data for their follow-up. And I'd encourage you to get involved, as the follow-up data is very simple to collect data for. So the next study I wanted to mention was LEARN, and I'm extremely proud of our medical students for leading the largest undergraduate assessment of exposure to urology ever performed. This was a 3-month cross-sectional survey across 39 medical schools and FY1s in the UK. With over 8,000 responses, we hope to assess the undergraduate exposure and be able to redefine the new syllabus for undergraduates to be exposed to urology. We hope to lobby the medical schools after this and hope that this can impact some change and bring new people into urology as a result of this work. I'll just mention a few other opportunities before we finish. The Burst Bgui podcast series is a collaboration with the Bgui, where the NICE guidelines published in the Bgui are summarized in the podcast and published on the website. So we do encourage you to keep an eye out for further guidelines that are published and an opportunity to do this. There's also an opportunity for peer review, and anyone who's keen for peer review opportunities can get in touch with their CV and we can get you involved. So we've touched on a number of studies today that you can actively recruit patients for. There's also the opportunity to propose new ideas, and I'd encourage you to get in touch with us via our website for project proposals. There's also the opportunity to get involved in individual projects we've mentioned, or the committee as a whole. And I do encourage you to go to our website, which has details of all of the opportunities and ways to get involved. I'd like to thank you for listening to the introduction, and I hope you enjoy the rest of our session. Thank you.
I'm Asma Khan, and I'm the founder and the chef of Darjeeling Express, which is an unusual restaurant. It is a restaurant which is run all by females. Everyone is average age of women cooking is 50. It's also interesting as that we are often described as unprofessional. I would not want to describe my team as that. We're home cooks. We're home cooks. We're a team of, if you look at us, you would think, how are they running such a big restaurant? And I think that it's really important that, we talk about, perceptions of what people think people should look like, people who are working with you, alongside you. And I'll just give a brief outline of what my story is so that, and then I could talk about the lessons I've learned and the reason why I want to share it with you, because, this has been an incredibly challenging time. I mean, absolutely for all of you. Everything that you trained for, studied for, things that you had planned in your lives was set aside, and everyone was thrown into this deep end of trying to deal with the pandemic. As a restaurateur, I went through the same thing. We were shut down and everything changed. But one thing that has happened to me throughout my life is that this has happened to me too many times. And this is the experience of age. I'm 51. I came to this country as a young, newly married wife. I had an arranged marriage, and I came into a place which was very challenging, and I had to adapt to this. And this great sense of loss, there is a word in my culture, it's called kalapani, which is exile. I felt that. And I can't see all of you, but I think many of you are possibly young or have seen technology from a very young age. When I moved to this country, I'd never seen a computer. I'd never seen a mobile phone. And 30 years ago, you couldn't contact anyone in India where they didn't have any technology. You had to arrange for someone to be near a phone when you called, and you timed the call for 3 minutes. It was very expensive. I wrote letters back home. And in this sense of huge isolation and feeling abandoned, bereft, rootless, I realized how important it was to have a network. I realized how important it was to have people who you could relate to, even if they were not like you. And this sense that, I need to find a way to breathe. I need to find a way to live. And the only way I can do this is trying successfully building up a network around me. Even the word network was something I probably didn't understand the meaning of. It's hard to imagine what life was like 30 years ago. Now, when people say they miss home and they're missing, family, you can Skype your dog in Delhi right now. But, in my time, you couldn't do it. You couldn't meet people. And if you had arranged to meet someone and you went there and they didn't turn up, you waited for half an hour and then you went home. Then they'd call you on a landline saying, oh, something happened, I couldn't come. Those were the days that I moved to this country, very, very harsh weather, very cold, and I was very cut off. And I slowly realized that I had to find a way to go home when I could not go home. And this is why I cooked. I didn't cook to please myself. I cooked to heal others because I understood what it was like to be rootless, without a home. And people would ask me, where is your home? And I would say Calcutta. And they said, no, we mean, where do you live in Cambridge? It just didn't happen. It was very hard. But eventually, life, took some turns for me. I decided to study law. And then at the same time, my husband decided to leave the University of Cambridge, where he was teaching. So I had to move my studies to London because I didn't want to live alone. That was such a crazy, scary idea for me to live alone. This was still for me, Pardes, the foreign land, the outside land. I didn't see myself as belonging. I had no roots. And I'm talking about like 5-6 years down, having moved to this country. So, and after that, we moved to London, and then I did my PhD. I had 2 kids. And then I decided, I wasn't going to get a job and I wasn't going to be a lawyer. I hated being in court. It was the worst thing. It's so frightening. And no one wins in a court case. Everybody loses because whoever's lost, everyone spent so much money. And I thought, oh, I'm not going to do this. I really want to cook. I didn't tell anybody. Eventually, I opened, my supper club behind my husband's back because no point telling him, that I'm going to have, 20 strangers sitting around your dining table and eating, walking on your lovely carpet. He would freak out. I think most people would freak out. I don't think he was an unreasonable man, so I didn't tell him. I kind of waited till he left and I did these supper clubs, which were very successful. This was the beginning of my food journey. After that, after maybe 4 years, my kids started complaining. And, I was scared. They would complain to my husband. They went and complained to my dad instead. And my father said, you have to stop. So I then moved to a pub where I was extremely unsuccessful. I would go around trying to sell Indian food to, people who looked like aging rock stars, biker gang people in this very trendy restaurant, a pub in Soho. And they were like, oh, no, we don't want your curry love. And this was 2015, not that far, ago. But the idea of an Asian housewife cooking food in a very trendy Soho pub, people just looked at me and stared at my shalwar kameez and made me feel I did not belong. I knew I didn't fit in, but one thing I knew, I was going to be so spectacularly successful. All of these people were going to watch me in awe. And I say this with no arrogance, because for me, this became about identity, networking, connecting up to people who may not look like me, but were on the fringes of society, didn't feel that sense of belonging. And I gathered my team together, the women who'd been cooking in my house, who were housewives and who were nannies and cleaners in hospitals. I live opposite Chelsea and Westminster Hospital. And they were working in the hospital. I met them there and we built up this team. Today, it's the same women cooking in this kitchen downstairs right now. And it has been many years. Now, it's not that I self-selected people who look like me, who were like me. As far as the kitchen was concerned, yes, because they had to cook like me. There is no point hiring men who learned to cook in a culinary school in India and then went on to stainless steel empires in 5-star hotels in India and learned to cook there. I don't even have a measuring scale in my kitchen. I don't use any machines. We knead the paratha dough by hand. We don't use gizmos. So I had to use women who understood to cook intuitively. So on that level, I self-selected my team. But after that, I deliberately went out and tried to find and recruit diverse people to help me. So when we went to the pub, I had 4 Australians, 2 Africans who were helping us run the service. And it was sometimes challenging, especially when things got very difficult. Then no one could understand anyone's accent. Everything broke down. But we wanted to work together. I tried to find people who had that same hollowness that I recognized from myself when I moved to this country. And I will quickly complete my story so I can then move on to this whole idea of diversity, building up teams and how you work. So essentially, I was, not selling my food. One fine day, Faye Mashler, who is a very respected food critic. At that time, she was writing for the Evening Standard, came to celebrate her 70th birthday in this very trendy pub. She ate my food. 2 days later, she wrote this review that was incredible. And all these men who told me, oh, no, not your curry love, we know curry love, stood for 2 hours to eat food because they'd read in the Evening Standard that the food was good. But I forgive them. I forgive all those who sidelined me and rejected me for my accented voice, for my Muslim name, for my immigrant status. Because I understand there is a lack of understanding of people who look like me. And one of the things that I knew I was going to do, and I don't know how, was to find a platform with which I could use food as a bridge, as a tool of communication with other people. So my feeling was, so many people love, chicken tikka masala, we love samosa, we love, we know who Shah Rukh Khan is. They know these kind of snippets of my culture, but they don't know me. And my attitude was, you cannot have my food, you cannot listen to my music, you cannot buy my clothes if you don't have me. It is very important for you to understand where I come from, where my heritage is, what my bloodline is. And I think it's so, it was a great opportunity for me to use the pub where, people who I would have crossed the road if I'd seen them at night, I was serving them. And they probably never spoke to someone like me. They would just stare at me and say, oh, this pin on your nose, how does it go through? These are guys who are heavily pierced. We were talking about piercing, earrings and what, but we found the middle ground. We found somewhere where we could communicate. This is because we were thrown together in a space. I was serving them food. And once they ate the food, they would ask me things like, so, what is this dish like? And what is this called? And why is this like this? And the communication started at that point. And I think that it is so essential that we take opportunities like this, where, you are in a position where you look different from people, you sound different from people. This is not a hindrance. This is your greatest hour. This is your advantage. And when you are in a position of power and you come across a team of people who are different from you, who seem to have prejudices, who have fears about, others, this is far more significant than just what you're doing in your job. You can change the life of someone. It can be life-changing. Your arm around that person, your affirmation of something that they want to do, you respecting and honoring them. This is how, walls come down. And I used food as a way to bring walls down. My team at the moment, I have, people were surprised, and he did face a lot of prejudice. People was, asking me, why do you have a black personal assistant? That's like highly offensive thing to say. But people would tell me this, that, why have you got a man working for you? And he's black, he's not good. And I say, how can you even say this to me? But when he walked in, Eddie, into the room, and he looked so nervous, and he told me, I don't know anything about your food or you. And I just loved his desire to learn. And I thought, fine, come along, come into the way. So, I wrote an article recently where, I was starting to cook biryani. I'm Muslim, and, we have we start off by saying Bismillah, which is, you start off with a prayer. And he said, oh, yeah, I know Bismillah. It's from Bohemian Rhapsody in Queen. And I looked at him and I said, no, it's a prayer from the Quran, but it's fine. Don't take offense, be large-hearted. Because sometimes people comment on things, not because they want to be rude to you, but because they have no idea. And in your compassion and in your humane response to them, you explain who you are. So that next time, when my lovely PA hears the word Bismillah, he will know what it is, that it's not Queen. It predates Queen by quite a lot. Now, so the thing is that you've got to be very, if you tear open your heart and be generous, be kind, people respond to that. And in a team which is very diverse, which I have right now, I have, people from all nationalities. And I come from South Asia, where, there's a class, basically hierarchy. Everybody will recognize, because whichever country you come from, you know what that is. India has an additional layering of differentiation between people, which is caste and religion and language and region. In my kitchen, there is nobody who's from the same background as me. There are women who have had very deprived backgrounds, but are completely pure vegetarians, but they help me cook meat. So all those, cultural baggage that people had, they set aside, because what was so important is over the years, they were Darjeeling Express. They were not Maharashtrian Brahmin. Their identity became, so when you are able to make someone feel they matter so much, they become that team, your team. And this is not something that you can stand around and giving, very, rousing speeches. Oh, we are one team and everybody hip hip hooray. It doesn't work that way. The one way that you can make a diverse team, a team where there are a lot of differences from their upbringing, from their understanding, is actually to make that person feel valued. That's it. You don't have to shove this whole thing of a team player down their throat. A lot of people do that. I think that's wrong. Just be humane, just be kind, just be just and fair. Treat your men and women in your team identical. Do not fall into cultural traps when you make jokes and comments about someone's lunchbox smelling a lot. Like who used the microwave last? This might seem funny to you, but for someone like me, who looks like me, who has just put in a very strong smelling curry in that box in the microwave, I feel humiliated. I feel smaller. I feel less part of the team. So there are no, of course, you can say things, by mistake or in innocence, rectify it, correct it, publicly correct it. There's no point you going at the back of the room and telling that person, I'm sorry, I didn't really mean it. Publicly, you have humiliated that person. Privately, you have said, sorry, it's not good enough. To be a real leader is to apologize publicly, to publicly take responsibility for things that didn't go very well. You don't just take credit when things go right. You must also be there when things go wrong, when people feel hurt and people feel humiliated. You stand there and apologize. You stand there and say, I think we didn't do this right. Even if it was not you, take onus, take responsibility for that mistake that happened. Where some cultural, religious, sensibility was stepped on by mistake, deliberately, whatever. The buck stops with you as the head of a group. And as a team, I think one of the things that I did to try and encourage people to understand people who are different is that we would tell everybody, anyway, all of us love to eat. Look at my size, don't I look it? Anyway, everyone loves to eat. So we tell them, if it's your festival, you bring the food and then you present to us this feast. You tell us what this food is, why, and we'll all dress up in whatever, you tell us to. And this way, there was this kind of small thing. Staff lunch was this lovely thing where people would bring in food from Georgia, from Russia, from Turkey. And, there were special days. And, through food and the fact that this person dressed up and some of us dressed up as well. Like, for us, India has 10,000 festivals. Everything is celebrated over here, everything. So for Diwali, we lit up diyas all over this place. For Ramzan and Ramadan, people try to fast. If they don't, they cook food. And like day after tomorrow, we're sending 120 boxes of food to a refugee hostel. And everyone is cooking and they're saying, oh, this is like, ibadat, or this is like part of our prayer. They're not Muslims, but they understand the cultural context when you do these kind of things. So this thing that you open, conversations between people by using festivals, by using, national days as a way of trying to get people to connect. Because, of course, not everybody understands, another culture, but it helps to bring the barriers down in your team. If they've shared this unusual Georgian, bread with cheese inside, and they understand, they might even look at the map to try and figure out where is Georgia. So Georgia, as in not Georgia in America, but near the Soviet, the old Soviet Union. It is so important that, the team understands we are diverse, but this is our strength. Never see diversity and differences of life experience as a hindrance. This is your greatest strength, because when things get tough, you will be surprised how the resilience of people, because of their differences of life experience, comes into the front. So someone who has struggled a lot, has had to adapt a lot, understands, that sometimes you've got to switch sides, you've got to switch, the way that you were thinking. Because, for all of us, we've done this journey. We have moved from a different culture to another. So I would like to just end by saying that, what looks like a problem for you, that everyone is so diverse and so different, is a strength as long as you find a way to make everybody feel equally valued, equally important, and that they count, that they're a team player because you respect them. They will then respect each other. Thank you very much.
It's a pleasure to be talking to you today about what the collaborative is and what the key messages are. And I've got one of the other principal investigators here, who is Mr. James Clasby, who is a surgical registrar and NRHR PhD fellow. Hello, James.
Hi, Neil. Nice to be here.
So I'm going to do the first part. I'm going to talk to you about what it's all about and how we did it. And then James is going to come in with some of the data-driven messages, the key practice messages. We'll talk to you for about 15 minutes, if that's okay. Okay. So we sort of, when COVID hit, we started this up, and several of the charities across the UK were kind enough to support our very rapid research response, which I'll come to in a minute, but they're just listed here. But we started this, I mean, we're natural network builders in Birmingham University in the Department of Surgery. And we started putting collaboratives together back in sort of 2008. And this is what it looked like, a bit rough and ready. Within a few years, there was complete national coverage and independence of subspecialty groups, which is great. We pushed that wide and we went to see how far globally we could go. And what we tried to do is connect surgeons globally. What we've ended up with is a network that can deliver faster research for patients. At that stage in our data studies, we were already working across thousands of frontline medical personnel over hundreds of countries. And within that, we've got a trials network, which I'll talk about. And then what we did once a year when we could is meet face to face and prioritize new research. So the frontline surgeons from these countries, our partner countries, would prioritize research, and we would add in the methodology and governance needed to deliver research. And then in 2017, we were core funded by the NIHR to be the UK's world's first fully funded global surgery research unit. This is how we publish all of our papers. They're under one corporate name with everybody listed at the end, and that works really well for us. For the surgeons who are listening, we have now figured out that 1 in 3 surgeons can't spell their names right the first, second, or third time, but we'll sort of just keep going. But what we did there is develop a portfolio of randomized trials. So the first 2, Falcon and Tutor, are looking at wound infections, Penguin's working with the anaesthetist looking at oxygenation, and Crane is looking at cancer surgery and nutrition. And these are, COVID has really made the randomized trial fashionable again due to recovery. But these started just before then, and they actually accelerated during COVID. But Falcon, 5,500 patients in 18 months. Cheetah, in about 15 months, it would have recruited a total of 20,000 patients. These are mega surgical trials. It's nice to give them animal names, have little cartoons. I am aware that the mortality rate of patients in these studies is very high. So we're trying to tackle these quite big, serious global problems. But as a result of that, what we did is we always had responsiveness, the idea that if people would tell us what to do and we add the methodology. So when COVID hit, we suddenly had surgeons from around the world saying to us, well, what do we do? Is it safe to keep operating? What is this and what does it mean? So we launched a research response using our infrastructure here and some charity funding. And we very quickly put together a network that's bigger than this. The N network has resulted in a data set of over 200,000 patients and data changing messages. And it's quite unique to be in that position after only a year of launching a research study. So I'm just going to talk to you about our first couple, and then I'm going to hand over to James. But very early on, we did a modeling study on the number of elective operations cancelled, and with just in the first wave, there were at least 28 million operations cancelled around the world. And this was our first step into what I call the public domain, because this stuff picked up a lot of media interest, ranging from the Mail Online to The Economist, and quite high Altmetric scores. But that just goes to show that actually this stuff is of public interest. And as we continued, we always decided to try and appeal to the general public. And so our next study was a prospective cohort study of patients having an operation who had a pre or post-op diagnosis of SARS-CoV-2. And that first paper unpicked that disease phenotype in the Lancet. And it was great to get into the Lancet in those days. Very rarely does one get to define a new sort of disease phenotype like this. But I do point out that the mortality rate was 24 at 30 days, and that includes patients undergoing major and minor surgery. And these mortality rates are higher than any aneurysm surgery, higher than the emergency laparotomy rate. So although it's great to get into big journals, this very muted celebration because it was on the basis of a lot of misery. But this did identify to surgeons they need to be very careful in who they are operating on during the COVID era. So that was a very quick start point where we got to, and then we've unfurled this more complicated series of studies. So James, I'm gonna hand over to you to talk about the next studies, and I will stay in control of the slides. So good luck.
Thanks. So the next logical step in this sort of pathway of data-driven decision making was, what can we do to protect patients from these risks of perioperative SARS-CoV-2 infection? And one strategy that was emerging around the world was this idea of a COVID-19 free surgical pathway, also known as a cold site or green pathway. And we define that as having a hospital pathway that was completely segregated away from areas that were treating or admitting COVID-19 patients, and where any area was mixed with patients that had COVID-19. This was defined as an area with no defined pathway. And in the early phase of the pandemic, when we were first looking at this, this was not a universal solution. About 1 in 5 hospitals had provided this pathway for their patients. And what we found really robustly was that the COVID-19 free pathway, these cold sites, reduced the risk of pulmonary complications and SARS-CoV-2 infection for patients. And that worked in lots of different sensitivity analyses. So it worked for minor and major surgery, and in both high and low risk areas. So even when the community transmission rates dropped off, there was still this really clear benefit. And why is that important? Well, these things are very logistically and financially challenging to impose in hospitals around the world. So provided for the first time evidence of their effectiveness. Next slide, please, Anil. Alongside these cold pathways, of course, everyone was wondering about whether we should test patients or not. And in this study, COVID surge cancer, that was done between March and August last year, there was a really low testing rate. About, again, 1 in 5 patients were getting tested before surgery. But having this testing strategy with nasopharyngeal swabs and PCR testing actually reduced the rate of pulmonary complications for those patients that had a swab. And we hypothesized that was because you could identify patients with pre-symptomatic or asymptomatic infection and then delay their surgery for later, so they weren't being captured within the cohort. And we looked at the different effects of testing in different groups of patients. And we saw that in high-risk areas for both major and minor surgery, there was this really compelling benefit for routinely nasal swabbing patients before surgery. So you could avoid 1 pulmonary complication for every 20 patients tested before major surgery. So this, massive effect. In low risk areas, there was still a really strong benefit before major surgery, but less before minor surgery. So this provided important evidence for the universal uptake of testing, and perhaps suggested that for minor surgery in low risk areas, counseling patients on the day of surgery if they've not had a swab may not necessarily be appropriate. Next slide, please, Neil. So our sort of next question that was rose from the network was, what should we do if we identify these patients that are asymptomatic and have a positive swab test? And we got some early data from our first cohort study that suggested an increased risk of pulmonary complications for patients that had a historic infection. Fortunately, that risk seemed to diminish over time. And in just 150 patients with this asymptomatic infection, we're able to show that risk roughly returned to baseline after a month or so. But this was not a definitive study. So in order to address this completely, we sought to undertake a collaboration across 2 networks, bringing together COVID Surge, this responsive network, with Global Surge, our global surgery network. And we conducted a project called Surge Week, which we think is one of the largest scientific collaborations of all time, involving 15,000 collaborating surgeons from 116 countries to collect prospective data on almost 200,000 patients. And this answered really robustly this really important question, and showed that for patients with an asymptomatic infection, you should delay them for 7 weeks or more. And if they're still symptomatic at 7 weeks, then you should delay them a little longer still. So really crucial data, particularly with an emerging group of patients that have had a previous infection. So the final thing that we've been working on with the data to date is around risk stratification for patients. And we've been collaborating with the machine learning team through Health Data Research UK to create complex models that will help risk stratify patients based on their risk of pulmonary complications. And this is now available online at covidsurgerisk.app and is being published in the British Journal of Surgery shortly, but allows you to estimate a risk for patients before surgery to help guide decision making about whether surgery should be delayed and to try and rationalize resources appropriately.
Hold on, bear with me, Professor Whitty. There we go.
Finally, using this data, we've also been able to do some modeling studies to answer questions where we didn't have direct data available. And the first one was around whether or not a surgical patient should be prioritized ahead of sort of age and sex matched patients from the general population. And what we showed in this paper in the BJS was that actually your return on investment for vaccinating surgical patients, particularly those undergoing cancer surgery, for example, was much better for patients undergoing surgery than age and sex matched people in the general population. And so we've been working with the UKVI, the Vaccines Initiative, through the Royal College of Surgeons to try and activate this. And in the UK, there is quite a rapid rate of vaccination, but on a global scale, it will be several months until universal vaccination is available. So we hope that this data will be really useful to improving surgical safety across different contexts. Back over to you, Anil.
Thanks, James. Just to finish, so we also pushed forward some patient-facing material led by one of our team from Queen Mary, University of London, Mary Venn. And this material was devised with patients and has been downloaded over 24,000 times. And it's available in 26 different language formats. And so again, it's just about pushing data in different directions. We've come out with 7 practice-changing messages, and they're embedded in the policy section of our policy website, which is on the screen there. And we've got some high visual reports that aren't presented like papers. They really get to the key message. They're more presented for policymakers, and so you might enjoy looking at those for a higher level, quicker view of what the core messages are. But what we have learned is that there was traditionally publication and sort of a presentation somewhere, and then things would stop. What we want to get to now is practice change and public engagement. And we're flowing down this pathway to do it. COVID surgeons close the gap, but we want to close the gap further. Gone are the days where there's a year of analysis, a year to get a paper published, the paper's behind a paywall. Within 30 days of finishing an analysis, we'll have done a webinar, we'll have that on YouTube. We publish everything open access, we create visual abstracts, and we're finding newer ways to close the practice change. And our final way via that website will be to create a digital CPD CME portfolio where you can do 3 or 4 hours on COVID surge, and it will be certified and held digitally. But we'll expand that, and in our world, we'll do it across appendicitis, cancers, vascular disease, bones. We'd be delighted to hear about whether you think we should be doing modules on really what the latest cutting edge research is and how you can learn about that very quickly. So you'll go to different websites to learn how to do an operation, and this is where you'll go to learn about the latest research data. Thanks very much for listening, and please keep an eye out for future studies, because we are probably going to do a sort of post-pandemic cohort in 2022. Okay, thanks very much. Thanks, James.
Hello, Kevin Gallagher here. I am the Resect Study co-lead, and I'm delighted to be able to update you today on behalf of the Resect Study team and all of our global collaborators about the progress of this important study. I would like to say a huge thank you to all of our funders and sponsors, without whom this important work would not be possible. I will briefly review the study objectives and design. I will show data about variation in TURBT practice from the hospital registration surveys. I will show some descriptive data from the patient records we have so far, and I will explain what is going to happen next and give timelines. I have been through the background and rationale for the study in previous presentations, so I won't go into this in detail. The summary is that we know surgical quality for the initial TURBT is a crucial determinant of early recurrence rates, and there is some evidence it impacts long-term outcomes, even mortality. There's an energy and an appetite across the urological community to raise the profile of and improve TURBT, which has been referred to as the neglected procedure. There has been an interest across specialities in the power of audit and feedback, with this editorial in the BMJ last year stating that the potential of audit and feedback to improve patient care could be realized through a more evidence-based and imaginative approach. Well, that's exactly what BURST is good at. So the main objective of the RESECT study is to determine if audit and feedback can improve the quality of TURBT surgery and reduce early recurrence rates. We aim to launch audit and feedback into the digital age by innovating a global method of recording and feeding back surgical performance in TURBT in a surgeon-driven manner. So this is how we will do it. This is a multi-center observational audit with randomized feedback to sites. Over 300 sites have already completed a survey about their usual practice. They are now submitting retrospective data about TURBTs done before they registered for the study so that we can control for their baseline performance. Once this is complete, half of the sites will be given early feedback about their performance and then asked to prospectively audit all subsequent TURBTs at their hospital. The other half of sites will be asked to continue the audit, and when complete, they will receive the same feedback. The primary outcome is the rate of achievement of TURBT quality indicators. The secondary outcome is the early recurrence rate. Even at this early stage, RESECT has made some major achievements. Hospital and collaborator recruitment has exceeded expectations. We are thrilled to have over 600 patient records submitted in the first 6 weeks. This is faster than we expected. The RESECT study team ran BURST's first ever live webinar. This was a huge success with 150 live attendees engaging in active discussion and debate, and subsequently almost 200 views of this on YouTube. We've built various software solutions to improve the experience of the users engaging with the study platform and to improve the utility of the platform for practical purposes. For example, this solution on the index operation case report form allows anonymous linking of surgeons registered at your site to the operations they have done. The page also displays site-specific information such as site recruitment summary and your date of site registration. We are relishing the opportunity to utilize modern cloud and data infrastructures to innovate in this field. We have more cool features in the pipeline. I have to say a huge thank you to the many people involved so far, from the core steering committee through the wider BURST team, our external peer reviewers, the national leads, statisticians and methodologists, software developers and data managers. And of course, a huge thank you goes to the 921 collaborators from across the world who've already given their time and will continue to give their time and their data freely to help improve patient care. I will now present some data from the hospital registration survey. These data are being presented specifically as part of an abstract later today in the bladder cancer session, which I hope you will attend. I will touch on it briefly here. At the time of analysis, 279 hospitals had completed the hospital registration survey, and there was significant representation from across the world. The survey demonstrated variation in practice. I won't go into too much detail here, but in summary, En bloc resection was common in Asia and less so in the UK and North America. Laser resection for TURBT was rare in the UK and North America and more common in South America, Africa and Asia. PDD was used for the first resection most commonly in North America. However, a key takeaway message is that of the 279 hospitals registering for the study, only 84 or 30% has any form of TURBT audit in place. Given how important the quality of the initial TURBT is in bladder cancer management, this highlights a major unmet need that the RESECT study is addressing. Other differences in practice the survey highlighted included a proportion of sites relying on imaging only for initial diagnostics prior to TURBT. It will be interesting to find out more about this at the patient level. Roughly a 50-50 split between sites that performed local anesthetic, biopsy and diathermy of small recurrences on flexi lists and those that did not. 1/3 of hospitals have dedicated TURBT lists. There's a portion of hospitals where urologists with a specialist interest in TURBT surgery are doing most of the TURBTs, but of course for most hospitals this remains a general urological procedure. About half of hospitals are using TURBT operative performance, and there is variation in the extent to which patients are discussed at MDT. We are delighted to have 850 surgeons registered in the database so far. 60% are consultants and 1/3 are trainees. We will capture valuable data about training and operative experience. The median case experience of surgeons was 200, and excitingly, 5 people registered who've never done a TURBT before, and we are delighted and honoured to capture their very first training cases. About 40% of surgeons had a self-declared specialist interest in TURBT surgery. So after 4 weeks when I pulled this data, we had 584 cases entered to the database from about 20 of the 300 sites, which is phenomenal given that many of the sites are still in the setup process. We would expect this to ramp up exponentially as more sites come on board. We're having rapidly increasing contributions from the UK, Italy and Turkey. This is the RESECT recruitment leaderboard as of 23rd May. A huge congratulations to Luca Orecchia and colleagues in Rome for submitting 51 cases in the first 6 weeks. There are 3 other Italian hospitals making it to the top 10. And we have Simona Ippoliti's team from King's Lynn in Norfolk, hot as heels with 43 cases. Also delighted to see rising contributions from across the world, particularly from Turkey. From these 584 cases, we're able to get a sense of the population being included in the study. As requested by the study protocol, 80% are first tumour TURBTs and just under 40% are training cases. Of the whole population, 22% are having re-TURBTs. Given about 60% of the population were high-grade tumours, this means somewhere between 1/3 and 1/2 of high-grade cases are having re-TURBTs. 40% of the cases involved multiple tumours, with the most common maximal tumour diameter lying between 1 and 3 centimetres. So we get early indication the study is capturing a population of patients undergoing crucial curative cancer surgery for potentially serious tumours. Now I would like to talk about the performance feedback and the prospective phase of the study. All sites will eventually be given access to a dynamic live performance feedback dashboard. As per the study protocol and the site agreement that was signed, the timing of access to this will be varied so that we can determine what, if any, impact it's having. Remember, sites can download their own data at any time they wish. You own your own data. We are working hard to build a dashboard that is of maximal use to you and the surgeons at your hospital. It will be hospital and surgeon anonymous. You can tell which data point is your hospital, but not any other hospital or surgeon. It will update in real time from data entered into the database. It will give comparative performance between hospitals and surgeons. It will allow filtering of data so that specific types of cases can be reviewed and assessed so that you can better understand reasons for your own performance, account for case mix, and develop strategies to improve. It will include educational and practical resources. This is a draft example of what this might look like. Please note the dashboard is still being developed and refined. Each dot in this graph is a hospital, and we have the percentage achievement of the quality indicator on the y-axis and the number of cases assessed on the x-axis. The idea is that you can see where you sit compared to other hospitals. But of course, differences in achieving quality indicators may be due to lots of factors, and we understand this. We're not naming and shaming. The point is for you to investigate and understand your own performance. Nor do we expect 100% achievement. There will always be cases where it is appropriate not to undertake certain actions. You will be able to subset the data by tumor size and grade to account for case mix. You can identify cases where the outcome was not achieved, determine if this was appropriate or not, and develop strategies to improve if required. The point is, we want to make it easy for you to review the performance at your hospital and have it compared to hospitals around the world. We will suggest some ways to improve and provide some resources. At the time of making this presentation, 12 sites had already submitted at least 25 cases within a few weeks of starting, which is a superb effort. Thank you. Remember, don't stop. You can submit as many cases as you want. The more you submit, the higher up the league table, and the more meaningful your data will be for your individual site. After you have completed the minimum retrospective cases, there will be a small delay before starting the prospective phase. The lead collaborator will be asked to complete a short survey about any potential changes or improvements that have been made at their hospital. Some sites will be given access to the dashboard at this stage. Others will be delayed in their access until a little bit later. After completion of the survey, sites will be individually invited to begin entering data about prospective TURBTs. We hope that this is going to start in July 2021. Some advice on doing the prospective phase. Of course, it's going to take longer to accrue the cases at an average of 3 per week based on the hospital survey. It will take at least 8 weeks to achieve the minimum requirement. Remember, all consecutive eligible cases at your hospital must be included regardless of which surgeons are doing them. You need to know the pathology, so I would suggest fortnightly case reviews of cases done around a month before. So I would sit down in mid-August and enter data about all eligible cases done in July, September for August, and so on. Data entry will be open until August 2022, with the last new cases being done in June 2022. So you basically have a year to enter data for the prospective phase, and we encourage you to do this consistently on a regular basis throughout the whole year, regardless of your minimum requirement. Keep entering data. This is crucial for the meaningfulness of the data for your own quality improvement purposes. I won't spend any time talking through this slide. You can pause the recording and read it later if it affects you. The bottom line is that there are various strategies you can adopt if you are moving hospital, but there must be someone either staying or coming in who will ensure completion of this prospective phase at the hospital you are leaving. If you have any concerns about this, please get in touch via email. So in conclusion, RESECT has liftoff, and we invite you all to join us on this journey to innovate in surgical data and improve TURBT surgery. Please note, we are still accepting new site registrations. Thank you very much, and I look forward to taking your questions in the live session.
Good afternoon, I'm Alex, a medical student at University College London and lead for the Stent Study, a national evaluation of urology teaching at medical school. Urological conditions are common, and urology is also a common rotation for UK foundation year doctors. Whilst the GMC regulates the standards and outcomes for medical education in the UK, variability in the exposure to each specialty still exists, and this could lead to deficiencies in training doctors with the knowledge and skills to manage basic urological conditions. There are international reports on the declining exposure of urology during medical school. The paradigm shift towards primary care has resulted in graduates receiving on average 1 week of urology, potentially contributing to only 15% of medical students having considered urology as a specialty, and to a decline in urology competition ratios over a 10-year period. In fact, urology observed the second lowest competition ratio of all surgical specialties in 2020. A 2014 UK study of Foundation Year 1 doctors reported low performance rates of catheterization whilst in medical school. LEARN is a national multi-centre audit led by the BAUS Research Collaborative. The study is led and primarily run by medical students. LEARN aims to assess undergraduate urology teaching across UK medical schools with the primary objective to compare current teaching against the BAUS syllabus, and with secondary objectives investigating the type and quantity of teaching, the performance rates of GMC-mandated urological procedures, and the proportion of students considering urology as a future career option. Over 500 collaborators were recruited through a targeted advertising drive. Over an 11-week period, each collaborator recruited individuals to complete a REDCap survey, retrospectively assessing their urology teaching to date. As such, Year 2 students' data reflects the teaching they received in Year 1, and Year 3 reflected teaching up to the end of Year 2, and so on. The responses from Foundation Year 1 doctors reflect the teaching they received throughout their whole undergraduate education. A total of 8,346 responses were received, 7,063 of which were eligible for inclusion, with representation from all 39 UK medical schools included in the study. There was a good representation across all year groups. All results from here on are from the subgroup analysis of the Foundation Year 1 doctor cohort, as they have most recently completed the medical education. In their undergraduate training, the median number of theory-based teaching sessions received was 8. The most commonly taught topics were urinary tract infection, acute kidney injury, and hematuria. The least taught topics were male urinary incontinence, male infertility, and erectile dysfunction. In their undergraduate training, the median number of clinical skills sessions was 3. Whilst the overall observation rates of digital rectal and male genital examination, male and female catheterization are relatively high, the performance rates of these procedures on patients remains low for male genital examination and female catheterization. There is a lower observation and performance rate of female catheterization compared to male catheterization. Foundation Year 1 doctors report having performed 2 female catheterizations whilst in medical school, compared to 4 in male catheterization. This lack of experience may reflect the lower perceived confidence in female catheterization across all year groups. In their undergraduate training, 20% report not having had a clinical attachment in urology. Of those who did, the median number of clinical attachment sessions was 6. 52% had observed a laparotomy, and less than a third had observed many of the bread and butter procedures in urology. When asked about a career and exposure, 20% have a urology rotation during their Foundation Year 1. 17% have or are considering a career in urology. 50% felt that they had received sufficient teaching in urology, and 29% felt that they received enough career exposure. Our Foundation Year 1 subgroup analysis shows that a wide variety of topics are being taught. However, there are some who have not received teaching in common presentations. In particular, andrology is poorly taught. There are reports that Foundation Year 1 doctors have not performed catheterization in patients, and this is concerning given that the GMC lists catheterization in their practical skills and procedures and requires newly qualified doctors to have performed on real patients during medical school. Furthermore, the ASSET consensus report outlines catheterization as essential to learn, irrespective of future career plans. Not all newly qualified doctors have performed digital rectal and male genital examination on patients during medical school, and whilst this is not a GMC mandated requirement, it is nonetheless a common examination within the primary care setting. Furthermore, as 20% of Foundation Year 1 doctors did not have a clinical attachment in urology, there may be limited opportunity to observe or perform urological procedures. Only 16.9% of Foundation Year 1 doctors have or are considering a career in urology, and surprisingly, this is higher than previous reports of only 15%. High levels of perceived insufficient teaching and insufficient career and training information has highlighted that there is much to be done to improve your undergraduate urology exposure. The key strength of our study includes its multi-center nature and large sample size, including a response from 16.4% of all newly qualified Foundation Year 1 doctors in 2020. This enables us to capture the heterogeneity in placement exposure both across and within medical schools. Our study is not without its limitations. The retrospective nature invokes recall bias in participants. However, to minimize this, we linked each university's curricula to the survey, and participants were prompted to view this before completing. Our survey respondents are more likely to be inherently interested in surgery or urology, although we observed that only 18.8% of all respondents have considered a career in urology. LEARN is the largest evaluation of urology teaching ever performed in the world. To our knowledge, this is also the largest study within any specialty and specialty-specific undergraduate training teaching. Overall, exposure to and teaching of urology is good. However, we have identified areas needing improvement, such as catheterization, which is a GMC mandated skill. Our results will allow us to engage with medical schools to support changes to the curriculum and enable a re-evaluation of the BAUS syllabus. The impact of LEARN is far-reaching. It benefits both the specialty and our future doctors, regardless of future career plans. Thank you for listening, and I would like to thank my colleagues who are part of the LEARN study team for making this all possible. We would also like to thank all of our collaborators who took part in the study, and I would like to thank BURST and BAUS for inviting me to speak at BAUS 2020 and 2021 as a medical student. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Clement. I'm one of the ST4 Urology in the west of Scotland, and I'm also one of the BURST core committee members. And over the last couple of years, 2.5 years, I've been working with Alex Light, who's one of the other members of the BURST committee, on the FIX-IT project. And the aim of the FIX-IT project is to find consensus in the conduct and decision-making processes for scrotal exploration and testicular torsion. So the background to this is obviously acute scrotal pain is an extremely common presentation to us, and the current gold standard investigation for suspected testicular torsion is an emergency scrotal exploration. The testicle is torted and found to be viable after untwisting, then usually it'll be fixed along with the other side. But if it's found to be unviable, then a simple orchidectomy is usually performed. But it's not always as easy as that, and many scrotal explorations will not be as straightforward. Findings might vary and they might be ambiguous, meaning surgeons are required to make a series of potentially complex intra-op decisions. For example, you find a testicle that looks a bit funny but isn't torted. What do you do next? So such decisions aren't actually inconsequential. You might be able to prevent future ipsilateral torsion by fixation now, but sexual fixation or choice of another fixation technique could risk the development of chronic orcalgia. So the current evidence isn't great. BURST carried out a systematic review published in the European Urology Focus, which showed there was no good evidence for one particular fixation technique, and there are no guidelines available internationally. So this is the rationale for FIX-IT. In the absence of high quality clinical evidence and reported variation in practice, robust consensus methodology can be useful to outline optimal surgical technique until comparative clinical studies can be performed. This also allows identification of areas of uncertainty that might form the basis for future research. Therefore, we aim to provide a reference for standard practice, which surgeons can use throughout the UK, using consensus guideline methodology for scrotal exploration technique and decision making. And this goes along with similar previous consensus documents on things like priapism or testicular trauma. So we focus on 10 particular areas. So consent, assessment under anaesthetic, the initial incision you'll make. The key crux of this is the interruptive decision-making processes, the fixation techniques, medical photography, how to close, what you should include in the operation note, the logistics of where, how and when you perform testicular exploration, and then follow-up as well. So the methodology we used was the RAND UCLA appropriateness method, which obtains consensus over 2 rounds. The first round ran between November 2020 and January 2021. Round 2 was carried out on Zoom in March 2021. So you create a list of statements. In our case, it was 200 in total, and each participant is asked to grade each statement on a Likert scale from 1 to 9, with 1 to 3 indicating disagreement with the statement, 7 to 9 indicating agreement, and anything else uncertainty. Then you perform a whole host of calculations to determine consensus or lack of consensus based on each participant's scoring. So the participants we got were 16 UK-based surgeons who are currently practicing, and there was a variety of subspecialties involved, covering a broad geographical area, and there was tertiary and non-tertiary surgeons as well. In the end, we had 2 adult urologists with a subspecialist interest in paediatric urology, 4 paediatric urologists, 8 adult andrologists, 1 urologist with another subspecialist interest, and then 1 senior urology registrar. So it gave us a broad picture of differing viewpoints depending on what people did normally day to day. So of the 200 statements, the vast majority met consensus and only 16 didn't reach consensus, but they obviously give quite useful information and talking points as well. And here are some of the key findings, and I say some because it was a whole host, 200 statements, and you'll need to read the paper out when it comes later on in the year for the whole picture. For the consent process, our participants felt that the BAUS consent form covered all of the main areas that should be consented for prior to scrotal exploration. For assessment under anaesthetic, participants felt that if you examine the patient when they're asleep, prior to scrubbing for surgery, and you feel that the likelihood of torsion is lower, you should still proceed to scrotal exploration, and that was with consensus. For the initial incision, they felt that both craniocaudal median raphe and transference incisions over the testes cancer were acceptable options, but there was uncertainty as to whether craniocaudal paramedian incisions was acceptable. There was no consensus as to what was the most appropriate incision, but there was disagreement with consensus that transverse or paramedian incision were the preferred options. For interruptive decision making, we presented the participants with 3 separate scenarios. So the first scenario was you're doing a scrotal exploration for suspected torsion and you find a torsion. In these circumstances, the anaesthetist should not be asked to administer an increased concentration of oxygen, as some people do, but the testes should be detorted and wrapped in warm saline soaked swabs. The surgeon should allow some time to assess interval change in the appearance of the testes, but there was no consensus to what that time frame exactly should be. The general feeling was that it should be at least as long as it takes to fix the other side, which kind of makes sense. If the testes remains of uncertain viability after detorsion and other methods to maximize perfusion, orthogodectomy should not be performed. And by uncertain viability, I mean it looks a bit dusky, might have improved in appearance somewhat, but not normal. In those circumstances, you should not perform an orthodectomy. The second scenario was a non-torted testicle and no findings nothing intraoperatively to account for the symptoms that they presented with. In these circumstances, the testes should not be fixed. The contralateral testes should neither be explored nor fixed. If there was nothing to account for the symptoms, but the bell clapper deformity is present ipsilaterally, the testes should be fixed in place to prevent torsion in the future. And if you find the bell clapper ipsilaterally, you should explore the other side to investigate for bell clapper again. And if it's present, you should fix it. For the third scenario, we said a non-torted testicle on exploration, but there was other pathology evident, and that might be an epididymoarchitis, or it might be a torted hydatid. In these cases, the testes should not be routinely fixed in place to prevent future torsion. Again, if the bell clapper deformity is evident, you should fix it and you should explore the other side, but only if the pathology to account for the presentation was not epididymoarchitis, because you don't want to risk the seeding of infection to the other side. For fixation method, participants agreed with consensus that both Dartos pouch and 3-point fixation are acceptable in children, but the use of additional sutures within a Dartos pouch is not. And in adults, the 3-point fixation method is the preferred method. For suture choice, the preferred suture would be an interrupted, non-absorbable suture such as a Prolene. And the participants felt that the size of suture was important, but there was no consensus to what was the most appropriate size. And that probably reflects that we do explorations on patients of different ages and sizes with different sizes of testicles. For closure, the Dartos layer should be closed separately to the skin. And a continuous suture is a preferred option for the Dartos layer, while interrupted sutures are the preferred option for the skin. And post-operatively, the scrotum should be held on a compressive dressing. The operation note should document things like the techniques of fixation, the size and type of suture used if you're doing a suture fixation, the degree of twisting on exploration, and the appearance pre and post untwisting. And obviously you should document if there's any other pathology evident as well. Interestingly, there was a lot of discussion about whether an operation note or discharge summary containing the operative details should be given to the patient, and participants agreed with consensus that it should. And this is obviously important if the patient goes to another trust or a different hospital, so the urologist assessing them knows exactly what happened to that testicle intraoperatively, so they can make an assessment as to whether recurrent pain is something to be concerned about. So in summary, in the absence of level 1 randomised evidence, the FIXIT study proposes a best practice, expert consensus derived list of statements in the conduct of emergency scrotal exploration for suspected testicular torsion. We're going to publish a full paper this year, and like I say, this is only a very brief summary of some of our interesting findings, and I'll be very grateful for any questions in the chat section. Thank you very much.
Good morning, I'm Chong Gao from BURST. First of all, I'd like to thank BAUS 2021 for giving me the opportunity to present on COVID Search BURST, Urology Cancer Follow-up Study. My presentation is divided into two different parts. Firstly, the initial analysis of the COVID Search Cancer urological cancer patients that were operated on between March and July 2020, as well as presenting on the urological cancer follow-up study to be launched in June 2021. Firstly, COVID Search was platform studies aiming to explore the impact of COVID-19 among surgical patients and services. In particular, COVID Search Cancer was a study that included urological cancer patients who were operated on over a 3-month period, and the recruitment happened between March and July 2020. This hopes to understand the complications of patients who are operated on during the first COVID pandemic, but also to understand the disruption of COVID-19 to routine cancer treatment, especially amongst those that were not operated on as well. This is the preliminary results of patients that were operated on between March and July 2020. A total of 1,900 patients were operated on, and there's an equal split between 3 different cancer groups, which are kidney, bladder, and prostate cancers, respectively. As we can see here, there's a low rate of patients that were diagnosed with COVID-19 during their cancer surgery, and amongst patients that were diagnosed with COVID-19, there was a higher rate of patients who have unfortunately passed away at 30 days. The majority of these patients had undergone prostatectomies, nephrectomies, TURBT, as well as cystectomies. Across all cancer groups, for patients that were diagnosed with COVID-19, there was a 51% rate of pulmonary complications, and these refer to any pneumonia or ARDS that have developed, and there was a 24% rate of 30-day mortality. This was lower amongst the urological cancer patients who have undergone cancer treatment. The pulmonary complication rate was 25.6% for those that were COVID positive, and the 30-day mortality rate was 18.6%. In general, there was a higher rate of patients who have developed Clement classifications of grade 3 or more when compared to BAUS 2018 data, as we can see here, especially for cystectomies as well as prostatectomies, where there was a 14.7% and 3% rate of complications as defined by CD grade of 3 or more. And there's also a significant difference between patients that were COVID positive and COVID negative. It was 23.7% for those that were diagnosed with COVID-19 and 5.3% for patients who were COVID negative during this period. And secondly, I'd like to present a urology follow-up study. A total of 2,700 kidney, bladder, and prostate cancer patients were recruited to the initial COVID search study between March and July 2020. And during our follow-up study, we hope to collect data on the longer-term outcome of patients managed during the first wave. And this refers to patients that were operated on and not operated on during a 3-month period for each local site. We hope to have a 3-year follow-up study for bladder and renal cancers and a 1-year follow-up for prostate cancers. The prostate cancer study is led by Arjun Nathan, which hopes to evaluate the short-term oncological outcome of patients undergoing radical prostatectomies. For patients who are operated on during the initial data collection, we would like collaborators to collect the oncological outcomes at 12 months. And if patients were not operated on during the initial data collection, if they had been placed on neoadjuvant therapy whilst waiting for surgery, and the subsequent perioperative outcome. If during the 1-year follow-up period, patients did not have any further surgery, was there a new treatment decision or any available repeat imaging or PSA? The renal cancer study is led by Alex Light, which hopes to evaluate the recurrence or upstaging of disease for patients who had undergone nephrectomy. For patients that weren't operated, we'd like to find out if they had undergone further surgery during the follow-up period, and if not, any changes to a tumor volume or any upstaging and the overall survival of patients overall. The bladder cancer study is led by Cameron Alexander, where we hope to do a bit more retrospective data collection on patients who have undergone TURBT and if they have undergone further treatment such as cystectomy or radiotherapy. And lastly, collecting further data on any recurrence, changes to a staging, and any perioperative complications, and their overall survival. We're excited to say that over 53 sites from 21 countries have registered for the study, and that allows us to collect 1,200 patients follow-up data. And that's why I'd like to urge all collaborators who have taken part in the previous COVID search cancer study in 2020 to take part in this study. You do not need to identify any new patients, and please keep the data key from last year so that your data collection can be done for the follow-up studies. Please register for the study using the following link, and we hope to launch it in June this year. Last but not least, I'd like to thank the co-principal investigators, Mr. Varul Kasi from BURST and Prof. Grant Stewart from University of Cambridge and Adam Brooks Hospital, as well as Prof. Thomas Pinkney from BICOPS. And also the many thousands of collaborators who have taken part in COVID Search, the Urology Steering Committee, BICOPS, the Urology Foundation, and the BAUS Committee. Thank you very much.
Good morning. My name is Cameron Alexander. I'm a core surgical trainee currently working at the Royal Bolton Hospital in the Urology department, and I'm a BURST committee member. And it's a real pleasure to have been invited to speak today on the role of the BURST collaborative in education, and in particular on its role in educating urologists on clinical research. Many of you will be aware that historically, surgical specialties, including urology, have been criticised for a relative lack of good quality research to inform clinical practice and guidelines. But in recent years in British urology, there have been many reasons to feel really optimistic that the engagement of urologists in high quality research has rapidly improved. And there are many good examples of this. It includes a high number of really practice-changing randomized controlled trials in urology, the adoption of rigorous clinical practice guidelines, and the formation of a national trainee research collaborative in BURST. So it's clear, I think, that in UK urology, there has been a real acknowledgement of the value of such research projects. But a major challenge still remains in how we look to train and educate busy urologists so that they feel able to engage in research studies and use this research in their clinical practice. Surgical training in its current form demands that we develop a range of clinical surgical managerial skills, and it's not surprising then that there is such limited room for grounding in research skills. And there are barriers which limit urologists from being able to engage fully in high quality research. There hasn't been the necessary support or infrastructure to allow all individuals, not just those that have extensive academic training, to be involved. The question of how to educate urologists in research has been central to the core objectives of the BURST collaborative from its beginning. We knew that if we wanted to deliver high impact research that everyone could contribute to, you have to consider how to provide users with the skills that allows this to happen. So we started to think about how we could look to achieve a successful educational program to train urologists in research methodology and to become more comfortable in using research. And we felt that such a program needed to have a number of key features. For example, it should be available on a flexible basis, meaning that any resources that were developed could be used at any time, revisited if needed. And we wanted to make the use of online platforms, meaning that these tools could be accessed from your phone, from your tablet, and on the go. And they should be based on core and basic principles, focused on what is relevant to clinicians, delivered in a way which is easy to digest. And we wanted them to be as interactive as possible. We wanted to have a way for users to test their knowledge and, where possible, have a way of providing evidence of their progress. And we also recognized that we need to draw on the research expertise and experience within the British urological community, and that there is a value in hearing from those who have previously navigated difficult research projects and understand the value of research in a clinical career. So if I was to summarize how BURST has tried to educate urologists on clinical research, I would say that we've done this in two main ways. Firstly, we've tried to do this directly through involvement in our collaborative research projects, such as Identify and Resect, and collaborators have been able to and will be able to get hands-on experience by contributing to these projects through data collection, for example, but with the support of the BIRST team and the BIRST infrastructure. For example, as part of our launch of the RESEC study on bladder cancer, we held a live online webinar to provide an open forum for questions from an international audience. And secondly, we have developed a number of specific tools, principally with the collaboration and help of the Bgui, that we think will be of great use to urologists. And that includes the Bgui knowledge e-learning modules in research methodology, the Bgui BIRST podcasts on key papers and NICE guidelines, and the Legends of Urology podcast series. And these are resources which I hope to really advertise to the audience and encourage you to look at in coming weeks. 4 Bgui e-learning modules have so far been published by BIRST members, with several more in progress, and they are available via the Bgui knowledge website and the mobile app. And as I've said before, the focus of these is on teaching the basic principles of research methodology. If you want to learn about the basics of how to perform an electronic search of the literature, or about the different types of research studies, or how to analyze data, these modules are a really excellent starting point. And the software platform that's been developed by Bgui is really impressive. It's easy to use, it integrates interactive components, including video and assessment questions. The content has also been peer reviewed. It has been reviewed by methodological experts to ensure that the content is accurate and that it's high quality. Bgui has been at the forefront of integrating their research into a range of media options that are easily accessible. And the BIRST Bgui podcast series is a really excellent example of this. The BIRST team have developed over 10 podcasts, which look to summarize both NICE guidelines and key papers published in Bgui. This is really about trying to provide users with a way of listening to key urological content on the go without having to sit down and read a full paper or a full guideline. It's a convenient summary, the key take-home messages and results are explained, but it also helps urologists to keep up to date with the literature when time is limited. And it's a really excellent option, for example, to listen to this when commuting to and from work. The Legends of Urology podcasts, which BIRST have developed, have a slightly different theme. They're light-hearted, informal discussions with urologists who have navigated successful careers in various subspecialties. And they're clearly about more than just research, but they do aim to provide access to advice and mentorship from those who have already successfully navigated complicated research and educational projects. They have 5 episodes so far. They're funny, interesting highlights, and they collectively have had almost 1,000 downloads already. All of the podcasts that BIRST have developed can be easily accessed via major streaming platforms. Many of you will be familiar with that, includes iTunes and Spotify. So if urologists are going to continue to be involved and engaged in research, they need to be adequately equipped with an understanding of research methods, which is perhaps still not happening as effectively as we may want it to. Educating urologists in research methodology is central to what BIRST wants to do. A great collaboration between Bgui and BIRST has led to the development of many really good resources, which can be used flexibly and on the go. And that includes the e-learning modules via Bgui knowledge, the Bgui BIRST podcasts on key papers and NICE guidelines. Please do also listen to our Legends of Urology podcasts and look out for further episodes and modules becoming available for each of these in the future. We really hope that you find them useful. Thank you very much for listening.
thank you for joining our burst session of 2021. I'm very grateful to all the speakers for spending their time and delivering their talks. I hope you enjoyed them. I certainly did. I was inspired by Asma Khan's talk on diversity and how to get the best out of your team. And I hope that each of us will reflect internally on how we can promote equality, diversion, and inclusion, as I think we all have a responsibility to do so. I was also inspired by Anil Bangu's talk about what's possible to achieve with collaboration. And I'd encourage you all to approach research with that positive frame of mind, and anything is possible if you believe in it. We heard talks from a wide range of different subject matters, from bladder cancer, prostate, and renal cancer, to testicular torsion, education, and really we had a diverse range of people presenting those topics. And I hope we gave you a good example of the types of things we're doing in burst. And we're always welcome new ideas, and we always welcome collaboration. So please do get involved in recruiting to our existing projects or suggesting new ideas if you'd like to be more involved. So we look forward to keeping you updated on our future projects, and we hope you've had a great BAUS. Thank you.